Hello and welcome to another edition of the SpareTime Podcast with me, Nigel, and him, Ben. And this week we have another PBA bowler. We're getting quite a few PBA bowlers of late. And this week's guest is PJ Haggerty. So welcome, PJ.
Appreciate you guys. Yeah, thanks for reaching out and asking me to be on the show. Look forward to chatting with you guys today.
You're welcome. Whereabouts are you at the moment?
What's that?
Whereabouts are you at the moment?
Oh, I'm in at the very moment. I'm in my office at work, but I live just outside Sacramento in California.
Oh, okay. Well, the weather's going to be better than it is here because all it does here is rain constantly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's pretty hot this time of year. We typically hover around 100 degrees in the summer.
Well, the only place you get 100 degrees in the UK is in an oven.
Yeah.
Certainly not winter weather. But thanks for coming on anyway. It is appreciated. So we're going to ask you a few questions about your bowling career. So we're going to kick off with, if you can explain, how did you get into bowling in the first place? Where did it all start?
Well, it all started when, I was a little guy. I was probably 2 or 3, I want to say. My parents both bowled league, and I enjoyed going to the bowling center and hanging out with them. And I remember seeing some pictures of, sitting on my butt, rolling a plastic ball into some plastic pins. And then from there, it really it took off. I got into juniors, and then my mom was the junior director of our youth league. So I spent a lot of time at the bowling center, and also played basketball, and I played a little bit of baseball as a kid, a little bit of soccer, but I never wanted to get hurt. And bowling was something I could do all year long. So I decided to stick with bowling.
Okay, so you started pretty early. We've had a couple of PBA players on who also started early. So are you two-handed or one-handed?
I'm one hand, even though sometimes I wish it was two.
Yeah, it was who was on last? Who was two-handed bowler that started?
Nate.
Nate?
Yeah, Nate.
Yeah, I don't know. We've done a few podcasts recently, and I'm starting to lose track of who was who. But it's been pretty common for the guys who started early on who just ended up bowling with two hands, a bit like Belmore, really. So I was just curious as to if that was the same with you. So your parents took you to bowling when you were very young, and then was your parents into bowling, or did you just sort of get into it because they enjoyed going there?
No, they were into it. My dad probably averaged around 200. My mom was a little bit higher than that. And then as they got a little bit older, they slowed down and didn't, really bowl as much. But that's kind of when my career took off. Is I got into junior bowling and then collegiate bowling at Fresno State. So that was I had an awesome college career with a bunch of great guys and a couple awesome coaches. And then in that time I was on Team USA, so I was able to compete on Team USA for a few years. And then that's when I went on tour, right as I graduated college.
Mm-hmm. So I was doing my research earlier, and this is the odd person who wins maybe 1 or 2 state titles or maybe a national title while they're at college. But yours sticks out a bit. So you were a 3-time collegiate player of the year and a 4-time collegiate All-American at Fresno.
Fresno.
Yeah.
Excuse my pronunciation. And if I'm not wrong, you only have 4 years in college, so that means you won Player of the Year all but one time and got All-American every year.
That's right. Yep.
That's some achievement. So tell us a bit about your college experience, how you ended up bowling in a college, and what it was like.
Yeah, Fresno, relatively close to where I live. Some people, they leave and they go to college and they might go across the country, or they might study abroad. Where Fresno was only about 2.5 or 3 hours in a car from where we lived in Northern California. But the program was awesome. It had a great history. The head coach was Glenn Carlson, who passed away during my sophomore year. But then our assistant coach, who I still keep in touch with and we're very tight, his name is Chris Preble. He took over the program at that point, and he's done an awesome job. He's really helped shape my career in several different ways. But yeah, bowling in college was great, man. It's 4 years where you get to bowl with your buddies, and you're consistently practicing, and you're getting education at the same time. And then on the weekends, you get to travel and compete. So it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of success. We finished second on the national championship show against Lindenwood. That was my sophomore year. But yeah, we were ranked in the top, if not number one, we were top 2 or 3 every year that I was on the team.
Mm. So obviously, now you're bowling PBA. Was that like a goal from, collegiate time or even before collegiate time, or was that something you kind of just fell into?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I would just go straight on tour after college and never do anything else the rest of my life besides bowl on tour. So yeah, going from college to the tour level, there is a massive learning curve. It's not like you can just go bowl college and then all of a sudden be, EJ Tackett or Belmo or Simo or some of these dudes or Troop or, I mean, it's a really, really steep learning curve from college to PBA.
So obviously, you're not full time in the PBA, from what I gather. So what do you do when you're not bowling PBA?
Yeah, I mean, so I was on tour for 6 years from six seasons. So that was like 07 to 2011, 2012 in there. And then I used my degree to get into the finance world. So I've been a financial advisor or in the finance world since then. So this is year 12, almost year 13 in financial services. So I'm a financial advisor at this point.
So everyone has to kind of make the jump or the leap, as you could call it, from college to the PBA. Now, I assume you started doing regionals, and regionals are something that you're clearly very good at.
Yeah.
That's 21 regional titles. So tell us about your sort of story from regional perspective.
Well, I always thought that the regional program would be kind of a stepping stone or a way to stay sharp when you weren't bowling on tour. Turns out there's it's 2 very different programs. The regional tour is great to get your feet wet, to learn how to bowl on some of the patterns. The one thing that you can't really mimic compared to bowling on tour is the transition and how the lane changes. You can't mimic the rev rate. You can't mimic the speed. That is almost impossible to practice. So the regional tour is probably your best or your closest way to be able to get better on tour. But now I look at it like if I can get in the car and drive a couple hours and go bowl for a regional title on the weekend, that's certainly going to save a lot of time and money than having to go chase the tour again. Because, I know I could compete on tour. I could probably win on tour. I'm confident enough that I could, but I have a really, really good job. But more importantly, we have, my wife and I have twins at home. They're 9. And so they're both in activities and sports. And so I'm probably not going to chase the tour anytime soon.
What was the deciding factor? You said you'd done a tour from 7 to 12, like for 5 years, 5 or 6 years. What was the deciding factor that made you not continue on with that route? What made you decide that, okay, I need to do a regular job here and not do the tour?
I mean, to be totally honest, it's because I really couldn't beat anybody. I would keep finishing somewhere between, maybe 20th and 40th. And that just wasn't sustainable to be able to make a living. I was doing okay, but I always told my wife, I want to live on a golf course one day. I want to be able to retire relatively early and have a nice retirement. And she was pretty honest and said, hey, if you keep finishing where you're finishing, we're not going to be able to live on a golf course. We're going to have to live, somewhere else. And so that kind of hit me, and I said, all right, well, why don't I just get a real job and stop chasing the tour? And, it probably worked out because we're very comfortable where we're at now and we do well. But there's also that what if if I had stayed on tour, how well would I have done? Who knows? But watching the guys today, my rev rate isn't as high as some of those guys, and I only throw it with one hand. So, I might be at a little bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. I mean, we see a lot of bowlers around, adult bowlers that are, probably good enough to start progressing and maybe take part in the tour in the UK, but they don't do that. But I think in a lot of cases, you've got to make that decision early on before you have commitments and, before you get yourself into things before you get responsibilities, because I think if you don't, then you're going to get responsibilities and commitments. And it's pretty hard to be able to bowl a tour when you've got those things, unless you've got, unless you have independent means.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, the hardest part about bowling on tour, number one, is if you just pop out once or twice a year, it's really tough to see the lanes the right way when you're used to seeing them at home or in regionals or in other tournaments. But then also leaving your family behind, being gone for a week or 2 or 3 weeks. So that's why I usually pop out once a year. I might bowl the Masters, or I might bowl, I've bowled the US Open before. But part of it is I don't want to leave the kids and my wife for that long. And I also don't want to be away from work for that long, because, our work is busy, and I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to our clients. But, I guess if you're going to chase the tour, just go all in. Don't try to go halfway or pick a stop here or there. It's like, if this is your dream, man, go chase it. Go jump all the way in.
I'm guessing when you started the tour back in 2007, that you didn't have any major commitments, and that's why you decided to do it. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, because I graduated college, no kids, no spouse, and said, let's go chase it. Still one of my best friends today, David O'Sullivan. He was my roommate. So we both graduated at the same time. We were roommates out on tour, so we chased it together. So it was fun. We drove around the country, bowling different tour stops, learning. But if I were to do it today, I would do it a whole lot different than what I did back then.
Yeah, because Ben and I have often had a conversation saying that, at what point in people's lives do they actually realize that, yeah, maybe I could, start a chase a tour, join the PBA, become professional. We've got to make that decision before the commitments start. And sometimes for people, the commitments will start before they get a chance to make that decision. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is, to reach the PBA, it's such a rare opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I agree. If guys are going to do it, it makes it a lot easier without kids, even without a spouse, because you're gone a decent amount. When I bowled on tour, we were gone from October to April. There was a little bit of a break for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but we were in a different city every week from October to April for the most part. So, man, if you have a family back home, unless they live in the central United States, where you could get home pretty easily, you may not see them for a while.
How did you fill in the time between April and October when in the break?
Well, a lot of times we would stay at other guys' houses, because if we're on the East Coast and I live in California, that's like probably a 5-hour plane ride, or it's probably a 5-day car ride, to get back home. So a lot of times we would just hang out at other guys' houses and practice and, talk about strategy for those times during the break. But if it was Christmas or Thanksgiving, I would fly home, for that stuff. But yeah, you got to be able to make buddies on the road and have places to stay if you can to pass the time and save on expenses.
Yeah. So I think it's, I'm hoping that people watching this will, think about that question. Think about, well, if you're a good bowler, then, are you seriously going to think about chasing a tour, or are you going to not think about it and end up with a commitment and lose the opportunity? Because I don't think many people give serious thought to that. So that's the reason why I'm highlighting that. I mean, when you were in collegiate bowling, did it occur to you at that time that, well, yeah, I could go on to the PBA, or did you just think collegiate bowling and after that, that's it? Or I just go back to league bowling or whatever?
No. So Tony Reyes, who passed away, he was a PBA champ, bowled 300 on TV. He coached the San Jose State collegiate team, which were kind of rivals with Fresno at that time when I was in school. And Tony and I became close. He owned a pro shop in the Bay Area. And he approached me and he said, "Hey, have you thought about bowling on tour after college?" And I said, "Yeah, it's been a dream since I was a kid." And he says, "All right, well, I want to kind of show you the ropes and show you how it's done, and just be kind of a buddy on the road." And so he's the one who I really leaned on when I first went on tour, because he'd been out there a while. He knew what it took to be able to live on the road, and so I really leaned on Tony. But a lot of guys that we bowled college against, they probably didn't think they were good enough to go bowl on tour. So after their college career was done, they went home and bowled league and bowled tournaments, and that's about as far as they chased it. They didn't really chase it after that.
So you need that belief, don't you? It's critical.
Oh yeah, I mean, even today, and I'm 39, so we're talking probably 20 years ago, roughly. I believe that whenever I show up to an event, that I'm going to win. Whether it's a tour stop, whether it's a regional, whether it's a local 6-gamer, it doesn't matter. I'm flying to Chicago this weekend to bowl. I think I'm going to win. I just truly believe that I'm good enough that I should win. If guys don't think that, you can say it all you want, but until you believe it, that's the only way you're going to compete, is if you have to believe it inside.
So how did you get such strong belief? Did you work on that, or is that just something in your character, or did it come natural?
Well, part of it is, certainly confidence comes with success. So since I've won 21 regionals, and I've won several other tournaments that are pretty significant, that aren't PBA, but they're still huge tournaments. Part of that is it comes with confidence. So number one, you have to believe that you're going to continue to bowl well. I would say that most of the time my practice now isn't so much physical, it's more mental. There's a lot of, visualization that I go through. There's a lot of notes that I've taken over the years, at some previous centers that I've been to, or if I'm bowling on a similar pattern again, I can reference those notes. But a lot of it is just like life. You just become smarter. You do more dumb stuff in your 20s, and in your 30s and 40s, you start to figure some things out and make better choices.
Okay, it's interesting what you just said, because Ben and I have recently been talking about, we talk about the mental game a lot, but we've just been recently talking about visualization, and we've been trying to figure out what is the best type of visualization to do. So can you talk us through the actual process of your visualization, what you visualize, what you feel, how it's done?
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't really have to do with how a ball goes through the pins or how a ball rolls. It's more feel, from the approach to the foul line. And if I can hit a couple keys that physically, everybody has keys that they work on, whether it's their push away or their slide or their posture or whatever, their hand position. Everybody has keys that they typically go, hey, if I'm bowling well, these things are clicking. So those are typically the things that I go through from a visual standpoint to say, all right, if I know that, this key is hitting and this key is hitting, then everything else kind of takes care of itself. Because to be totally honest, I'll just use this weekend as an example. If this weekend goes poorly, it doesn't matter to me. If this weekend goes great, it doesn't matter to me, because of course I want to win, but out of my entire career, and this is something that Rick Benoit taught me several years ago when we were on tour, out of your entire career, sure, this weekend is very important because you want to win and you want to do well, but in the grand scheme of things, really doesn't matter. So visually, if I can just make sure that physically I'm bowling well, I'm hitting the keys that I want to hit, then I'm either going to bowl great or I'm not. And whatever the result is, it is what it is. I'll show up to work Monday and I'll get back to being a business owner and doing my thing. But part of it is you want to prepare to do very well, but at the end of the day, you're either going to win or you're going to learn. There's no losing. So this weekend, maybe I'll win. That'd be great. If I don't, then I'm going to learn something.
Yeah, that's all part of a journey, isn't it?
Yep. That's
So the visualization, when you first started to do that, did you see within time? Did you see any measurable improvement in your game, which you can attribute to that visualization?
Yeah, because as you start to go back to the same centers, you know, a lot of times we predominantly bowl locally within maybe 100 miles of where we live. I would say that's probably the case for most bowlers, unless it's the guys on tour that are consistently traveling all over the country. But we typically go to the same maybe 10 to 15 centers every single year. So then you can start to see some tendencies with some of these centers. The low end hooks more, the high end is tighter, the low end is cooler, the high end is hotter. You know, there's one pair that really stinks, or maybe the left side is really good in this place. You know, you can start to kind of learn and figure out how some of these places operate. After a few years of learning some of that stuff, then you can start to apply it to your game and say, okay, well, I'm on Storm staff, so Storm has been gracious to have me on their staff for over 10 years now. Maybe the phase 2 roll is really good in this one center, and I've had a lot of success with it. Well, as I'm getting ready to bowl that tournament, I could visualize seeing my phase 2 go down the lane, and, oh yeah, that looked really good on that pattern or this pair or whatever it might be. And then you can start to kind of mentally prepare, because at some point, physically, we're really not going to change very much. We've thrown so many shots over so many years that muscle memory is just kind of is what it is. We might make minor adjustments here and there, but the biggest muscle that we have is our brain. We should make that as sharp as we could.
Your insight is like it's wild. You know, the knowledge that I've just heard there, like, yeah. But where'd you learn that?
A lot of it comes from failing, that's for sure. From losing, from bowling poorly, from not doing as well as you want. When we win a tournament, a lot of times there's really not much to learn, because everything went your way. Whether you bowled bad or you bowled just better enough than the other guy, you did what you needed to do to win. But unfortunately, we don't win very much. We win, you know, the best bowlers in the world win, you know, relatively rarely. It's just there's only a few guys that have been winning. Billy O'Neill, great year. EJ Tackett, great year. Simo just won yesterday. True, right? But it's not like we have 100 tournaments to compete in. You know, there's only a dozen to 15 tournaments that there's been. So what I'm getting at is when you lose, that's when you learn the most. And so when you pack up your stuff and you get in the car and you're driving home and you're going, man, I should have used that ball, or I should have played that part of the lane, or I got too wrapped up and I should have missed that spare. That was a completely emotional mistake because I left that 10 pin for the third time and I was just upset. And then I just, you know, didn't even think and I threw it and I missed it. Learning comes from losing. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I know exactly what's going through my dad's head right now, because 2 years ago, we flew out to South Point to play my first ever SYC over there, and he knows it. And Jason Monty was there, and he did like a sort of a seminar kind of speech, and he mentioned that his win percentage on tour was 12%, and this absolutely blew my dad's brain. And I think it kind of puts into perspective that in the grand scheme of things, I mean, yours is probably, you know, it's whatever it is. And I think if you actually work out your win percentage, like individually, whether that's you, me, you know, my dad, or whoever it is, if you work out the win percentage, it's going to be a lot lower than what people think. But I feel like you mentioned before, the only way you can kind of learn and get better is by forcing yourself into those situations that make you scratch your head. And I mean, I say it all the time of, I've come out of this competition and all I wanted to do was like throw myself into a door because it was so confusing. But I feel like if you don't push yourself into these situations that really challenge you and make you question yourself, then you're not going to develop.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, at some point, you have to look at the guys that are winning and you have to say, what are they doing that I'm not? And am I able to do that? Um, a lot of us, now that the two-handed game is such a big part of the game, you've started to see some guys convert and go from one-handed to two-handed to try to keep up with it. Um, if I was bowling on tour, I probably wouldn't consider doing that, only because sometimes there's some physical limitations with some guys. But a lot of guys have said there's Belmo and there's Simo and there's Troop and there's Chris Vi and there's a lot of these guys that keep winning. What are they doing that I'm not? And that's how, people can kind of transform their game into something that they never thought they would probably do. But the game is more mental than we think, because physically we really don't change a lot over the years. Minor tweaks here and there, but even though we continue to see the same guys on TV, what we can't see is what's going on in their mind. And in order to continue to make shows and win at the highest levels, it's more mental than we think it is.
So, and someone like yourself who's been on the tour for, I mean, you mentioned when you started on the tour, I literally straight away thought I wasn't even born then. Like, I was born 07. So for someone who's been on the tour for the past nearly 20 years,
16 years. Master's not your strong point.
I said nearly 20. Okay. So anyway, someone who's been on tour for 16 years, as he would say. You've seen these people win. I mean, you've seen sort of Bell and sort of break on the scene. You've seen a lot of bowlers who have come through their career and hit new heights. But you seem very, like you pay attention to a lot of stuff that's going on. What do you notice in these bowlers that are consistently winning or come out of sort of the depths and start winning loads? What are the sort of common factors that they possess?
A lot of it is rev rate. Surfaces around, and I would assume around the world, bowling surfaces are continuing to get older and older. There's more lineage, there's more lane play. So what that means is that these surfaces tend to hook. They continue to hook more and more. The guys that have higher rev rates and the guys that can throw it harder typically have more success. So when you look on TV, even if you watched the show yesterday, there's not a lot of guys that are really playing, that are keeping their angles tight and their rev rates, 350, 400. A lot of the guys that are winning, the rev rates are over 500. So I think that's a big advantage that some of these guys have. Even Jesper on the left side, his rev rate is crazy, crazy high. And when his ball hits the pins, it's over. I mean, he throws some of the craziest strikes anybody could ever see. So I think that's the biggest common denominator is, sure, Walter Ray isn't competing on tour anymore after an incredible career, but I would consider Walter a friend. We've had dinners together, and I've always thought he was a good dude. He probably wouldn't do really well on tour, and I think he knows that because his rev rate's not high enough. Even guys like Pete and Norm, as crazy good as those careers have been, they probably wouldn't have as much success today because their rev rates aren't high enough. And they don't throw it hard enough anymore either.
Do you think there's sort of other factors that can kind of fight it? I mean, say, for example, you as a one-hander, if you got on the pair with, say, Simo, who's throwing, or even EJ, who's throwing like 500 plus rev rate, is there something that you'd look at straight away and go, well, they might have a higher rev rate than me and be able to throw the ball like no one else can, but I can do this that they can't, and I'm going to beat them that way?
I don't know. Those guys have a lot of tools in the bag, man. Those guys have all the tricks. Simo can throw it back up. EJ, as good as EJ is, it always feels like his ball always gets back from 4, 5, 6 down lane on every pattern. His ball just always looks perfect. And so, do I have an advantage over them? I mean, sure, I'm a little bit older. Maybe I can grind a little bit better than they can, but at the same time, I'm also not on tour very much. So it's hard to say. I will admit I think I'm one of the best spare shooters that would go bowl on tour. The problem is a lot of these patterns require you to average over 230. And so, which means you need to have 6, 7, 8 strikes a game. A lot of these guys can miss a spare and then throw an 8-bagger behind it. And, or maybe I wouldn't do that as much. Mm-hmm. So those guys are at a different level, man. It feels like there's about 6 or 7 guys, and then there's a huge tier in the middle, and then there's a bunch of guys that are trying to get into the, one of those tiers. But some of those dudes are just on another level than everybody else.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you mentioned that the world of bowling is changing a lot, and there's this sort of elite level of the elite who are people like kind of, that winner circle that if you had to hedge your bets on, it'd be pretty safe to put your bets on one of those. So like, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the talent coming through in like America and stuff, but it's ridiculous. Like some of these kids coming through now. I mean, I bowled with some who were like a year or two younger than me, and I was thinking, I'm an all right level. And then you see these people who are, years younger than you, doing stuff that you think, like, this kid's going to be great if he sticks at this. What advice could you sort of offer, to people coming through onto the tour now who are going to be heading up against, the EJs and the Simons? What could you tell them to try and get them to rival them?
Yeah, the only way to get better, I think, in bowling is you have to compete. You have to bowl. You have to bowl everything. The local stuff, your leagues, your regular tournaments locally, then you have to travel. You have to be able to see your ball on different lane surfaces and different patterns in order to figure out, am I consistently beating these people, or am I doing something that they're not, or are they doing something that I'm not? Because otherwise you can't just go bowl on tour or show up and bowl like an SYC kind of thing, and expect to win if you've never bowled on that pattern or bowled on that surface. But if you can bowl on all those different conditions and take notes and see, which balls did well, what the scoring pace was, how did you end up, and then start to kind of keep a log of how you're doing, that'll give you some preparation for the next time you go back to South Point or your local place and you're bowling on this pattern or you're using this ball, whatever it might be, because the only way to get better in this game is you have to compete and you have to go out and try. Those results will ultimately tell you where you rank.
Just coming back to rev rate again. I mean, I've been bowling since about 1987, but for many years I didn't do it seriously. There was me and a friend Sunday night down at the local bowling alley, house bowls. We just did our own thing and found our own way around it. Then eventually we got our own bowls, and we still didn't do anything seriously. And somehow we ended up in a league eventually. I don't know how that happened. So we started to learn a little bit more about it then. And then, we did it for a few years and then just stopped. Then Ben got into it, nothing to do with me, accidentally. And that's when I started to learn a lot more about bowling, even though I wasn't really bowling myself at the time. So I haven't been around maybe bowling seriously as long as you have. But I don't remember when we first started that much mention of rev rate. But now, today, it seems to be mentioned all the time. Is this something in your experience where the emphasis is more and more on rev rate, or has it always been there and I just haven't noticed?
I mean, it's always been there because there were guys like Mark Roth and Marshall Holman that had more rev rate than everybody else. And then Mike Miller came out in, I want to say it was the mid-90s, and he was one of the first guys that kind of palmed a ball. His thumb wasn't in it. He bowled 300 on TV at the National Bowling Stadium. He had a relatively high rev rate for that time. So the game has continuously evolved. But during that time, that's when Walter and Norm won a lot. And those guys were throwing it straighter and they were keeping it in front of them. You rarely see guys, and maybe it's how the patterns are designed too, but you rarely see guys throwing it straight and winning. If anything, they're shaping it left to right. That could be because how strong the bowling balls are. That could be how the patterns are breaking down, how old the surfaces are. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But if you just look over the last call it 10 years of bowling on tour, I would bet that the average rev rate of the guys that are winning, it's got to be between, 425 and 475 or 500 as an average. You might get somebody that sneaks in with a lower rev rate and, snaps one off, but it's a way to create more power and more shape than the game has ever seen.
But you think what emphasis, what's influence, I say, do you think that Belmo had on the whole rev rate story once he joined the PBA?
Yeah, Belmo and Oscu for sure. Both of those guys were. I mean, I bowled again. I remember being in Guam in 2003. That was the first time I saw Belmo. Same with Oscu, and everybody thought, man, these guys throw it kind of funny. And yeah, look how that worked out. I mean, Belmo's had a crazy career, winning so many majors. Now there's Simo and there's Troop and there's Vi, and there's so many great players that have that. And then if you show up to a junior event, or even if in your local center, and people aren't learning how to throw it one-handed, they're learning how to throw it two-handed. Those guys have changed the game.
Yeah, I mean, Ben and I had a conversation not so long ago about that, and there's a lot of in the UK, and I can't talk for the US, but in the UK, in the youth bowling clubs, there's a lot of centres a lot of bowling clubs that don't necessarily have coaches with two-handed experience, and most kids are taught to bowl one-handed here in the UK. Mm-hmm. We just wonder whether, at some point that's going to change. I mean, I don't know if you still have any connection with you bowling in the US, but if you do you think that's still the same situation there as it is here, or is sort of two-handed bowling and rev rates become a lot more important within in the youth bowling scene when training kids to improve?
Yeah, if I were to start over bowling today, if somebody said, all right, you have to start over, I would 100% go two-handed. Of everything I know and all my experience and all that, if I'm going to reinvent myself and start to bowl on tour again, it would be two-handed. Not that I would do it, but if somebody forced me to and I had to pick, I would for sure go two-handed. I would also go see Mark Baker. He's been a coach that has done a great job with a lot of the guys on tour. He also recently came out with some videos about two-handed, which has been, I haven't watched them, but I would trust what Mark says, along with my coach, Chris Preble, back at home, more of a traditional, old school kind of game. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it, you want to get a good coach. And to be honest, I would try to mimic what Simo and Belmo do, because those guys win everything. And they, same with Chris Vi. He's made a lot of shows in the last couple of years. It's no different than us trying to hit a ball like Tiger Woods or Dustin Johnson or Brooks Koepka or Rory. We go, hey, how does that guy swing a golf club? I want to do that.
So you mentioned Storm. You've been on Storm for 10 years, is that right?
Yeah, a little over 10 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that come about?
Well, I was in a pro shop at the time, so I graduated college. I went and bowled on tour, and then in the off season, in between when our tour ended in April and then started again in October, I worked in a pro shop here in California, and continued to bowl some local stuff. And I was bowling regionals, and I was approached by Storm, which is pretty cool that they came to me and said, hey, we've noticed your resume. We've noticed you've been winning some things, which, by the way, that's one really probably the easiest way to get on staff, because everybody wants to know, how do I get on staff? How do I represent this company? The easiest way to do it is to just win and just keep winning, because you'll get noticed that way. But yeah, Storm came to me. We came up with a partnership, and yeah, it's been a great partnership for over 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. Look good. I'll come back to that question in a minute.
Okay, so every bowler has like these influential people, like your support system, your coaches, whoever it might be, and each one has certain people that are more important than others. I mean, it might be a mental skills coach, it might be a physical coach, it could be whatever. So I want to know who are the most important people in your journey to get you to where you are now.
Good question, Ben. The first person that comes to mind is my mom. She was my coach when I was a kid. And then as I went to college, then that turned into Glenn and Chris Preble, as we've kind of mentioned before. Chris will still point some things out to my game whenever we see each other, and he'll say, hey, it looks like you're doing this or you're doing that. And then when I was on Team USA, Rod Ross, who is now retired, but he was our Team USA coach for several years, a ton of great insight from him. And then as I was on tour, Mark Baker became my coach, but probably the one that was the most influential from a non-physical, from a mental standpoint, hands down, was Dr. Dean Hinnitz, who's out of Reno. He's a sports psychologist, and he's probably the one coach that I use the most these days. I still see Bakes from time to time and Preble from time to time, but that kind of team with those coaches all throughout my career probably made my career what it is today.
Mm-hmm. So sort of, there's been quite a few people who use sports psychologists, and I think it's a big part of the game, and what separates, I think, say, the good bowlers from the great bowlers, and the people who are sort of pushing the limits and the people that are breaking the limits. It seems to be like what goes on inside your head rather than like in your body, because I mean, there's lots of people that I could look at and go, you bowl superbly, but the second something goes wrong, or the second they're sort of challenged, it all goes wrong. So I feel like how important was it to have that sort of, professional psychological help to sort of push your career forward in a way?
Yeah, massive. Even from the Team USA days to bowling on tour and bowling regionals, this is a game where we're not going to strike every time. We're going to make a lot of good shots, and we're not going to strike. We're going to miss spares. We're going to make some bad decisions with bad lane play. It's just going to happen. But the more that you can kind of keep an even keel and not be, ride the highs and the lows, super high or be super down, it's the same thing as watching the guys on golf. If you watch the guys that constantly win, their emotions tend to be pretty flat. They get really excited when they win, if they're in the lead by 8 or 10 strokes. But for the most part, their emotions tend to be really, really flat, which is it's important in bowling because you're not on a team. You're doing everything on your own. So there's not going to be really anybody that's going to come to you and say, Ben, you need to calm down. You need to, refocus, or you need to, think positive here. It's all going to be on you, man. And so you have to learn where that comes from internally, and learn how to do that yourself.
Mm-hmm. Great. So obviously, you played for Junior Team USA for, quite a while in your youth days. So tell us a bit about that. How did that come about? What was it like finding out that you'd been called up?
Yeah, super fun. I remember traveling. We were in Guam. We were in Germany. We were in the Dominican Republic, and there's nothing like competing with your country on your back. That's super fun, and some of the memories that I'll never forget. That's for sure. It was some of the best times of my career in between high school and college, because it was kind of in between those years. Yeah, I mean, looking back, you're getting to compete for your country and against all these other countries around the globe. But that's how I met some of these guys that I'm still buddies with today. That's how I met Belmo. Even Dave O'Sullivan, the guy that was my roommate on tour, we met when we were on Team USA, and we're still basically best friends today. This is, this is over 20 years later. So not only is it cool to compete, but it turns into, lifelong relationships that you have with people.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, when you get that call that says, PJ, we want you to play for your country, what's it like to get that call up? What are the emotions, and who did you tell, most importantly?
Yeah, my parents were there, so they were able to see that, especially my mom, because she was so involved with bowling. My dad worked super hard for our family, so we could be able to afford the things that we were able to afford. My mom probably loved it more than anyone. But it's also a little bit, you're a little bit in shock because you realize the responsibility. Now you're going to be representing your country in some international events, and, you want to make your country proud. But at the same time, you embrace it because you know that you've made it to the highest level at that year. Out of all the amateurs or all the kids in the United States, you've made it to this elite group that will now get the best training, the best support. You'll have the most eyes on you, but it's fun to have that pressure on your back because, you've earned it. That's where, going all the way back to the first part of this call, you talk about confidence. Where does that come from? That's where confidence comes from, is you can tell yourself, I'm on Team USA. There's only maybe 8 or 10 of these spots available in the whole country, and I have one of them. That says something.
Mm-hmm. So, we'll bring it back a little bit. So you're on regional tour. Like you said, you've won 21 PBA regional titles, which is it's mental that you've won that many. And any bowler knows every time you bowl somewhere or every time you bowl an event, it's going to be so different to the last event you bowled or the next event you're going to bowl. So what was the sort of the key points in this continuous success and winning so much?
One thing that I learned is that you have to have a short-term memory. You can't drag on the wins, and you can't drag on the losses for too long. You celebrate the wins, and then if you have it, like, let's just say a tournament ends on Sunday, let's say you win it, but you're scheduled to compete the very next weekend, you don't celebrate that win too long, because one thing I learned, and this is another guy that had a huge influence who a lot of people probably don't know of, but his name is Jeff Francos. Never really chased the tour. Kind of the same as me. Family guy, has a great job. One of the best bowlers I've ever seen in California. But he says, whenever a tournament ends, everybody starts at 0. So even though you just won, if you show up the next weekend, first frame on Saturday, everybody starts over at 0. So it's good to celebrate while you can. Or let's just say that previous weekend went poorly and you didn't bowl as well as you wanted to, or you had a bad break or whatever it might be. You learn from those losses and you apply them to the next weekend. Because on the flip side, even though somebody just won, we're all equal come Saturday morning. Anybody can win on that next tournament. So you try to celebrate when it's necessary, but you also don't celebrate too long, and you don't get too down when things aren't going your way, because there's always going to be another tournament to bowl, and everybody starts at the same point.
Yeah, I think it was Belmore who, when we were listening to him in South Point, he said that, bad game or bad tournament doesn't define you. It's just, it's just one of those things that happens to everybody. And I think that's what Ben said earlier on. It's like, he was exactly right. I was thinking what Belmore said his win percentage was something like 11%, which I thought was a lot lower than what it would be in reality. And I think it's a good piece of advice not to dwell on something that doesn't work or something that goes bad and, tomorrow's another day. I think that's definitely what needs to be done. Coming back to your relationship with Storm, how has that helped you in the 10 years you've been with them?
I mean, number one, Storm kind of can speak for, the brand kind of speaks for itself. They've kind of led the way for so many years at every level. Top to bottom, the equipment is as good as it gets. I feel like the brand has everything that a bowler would need. But also knowing that you have support and you don't have to continue to impress them for them to continue to be on staff. As long as you represent the brand well, you talk to other bowlers about the equipment, and you just have, kind of a professional image when you're on the lanes and representing the brand, then, they appreciate that. That's what they want. They don't want guys kicking ball returns or cussing or, acting childish with their logo on your chest. They want guys that are pros and then act like that. So having them by my side, I can't thank them enough. The same thing with Vice Inserts. They're just down the road from us. They're only about an hour and a half from us. An incredible company to partner with. They've been great over the years. And then recently it's been I Am Bowling. They're in Las Vegas to make all the jerseys. Such an awesome team of guys to work with, from equipment to accessories to jerseys. So that way, you're locked and loaded, you're ready to go.
Yeah. I mean, we know that the top guys, when they're sponsored by somebody, to get the free balls and just have to pay for drilling, etc. Then one of the PBA bowlers on a podcast not so long ago, he was saying, well, I don't get free balls, but I get discounts on balls and things like that. So what's the practical benefits of being on a contract with somebody like Storm?
Well, my contract, I have a budget, and so I can use that budget for whatever I want. If I really like, this new ball called the Ion that's coming out soon. If I drill one and I really like it, I can order a few more if I want to drill them a different way. But I use that budget how I choose. If I don't want to drill, a ball for whatever reason, or maybe I have a ball that looks really close to something already in my bag, I don't have to drill it. In previous years, we would receive 2 of every ball that came out with other companies. This was before I signed with Storm. So every new ball that came out, you'd get 2 of them show up in your doorstep. All right, well, that sounds cool, but how do we know where it fits in your arsenal? Maybe you already have an asymmetrical ball that's low RG and it's super, super strong. And then another one came out, but I really like this one. So why do I need to drill this one? But they're sending to you because they want you to throw them. It's the latest and greatest. Where with Storm, it's much more flexible. If you really like a ball from a couple of years ago, you can keep throwing it, and they're not going to say anything they're bad against that, because there's a good chance that you're going to be using some of the newer equipment to fill other gaps in the line. So yeah, of course, it's a huge benefit that you can't take for granted, that I'm on Storm staff, because they could easily replace me with somebody else. But I feel like I've done the right thing with Storm to be able to represent the brand in the right way, talk positively about the balls and the equipment. And that's what they want to see. But yeah, it's nothing that you can take for granted, because it really is it's a huge benefit, and I'm very blessed to be able to represent them.
Do you ever find there's too much choice with balls and you start to get yourself a bit confused?
Can be, for sure, especially because now that Storm has 3 brands, Rotogrip and 900 Global, all of a sudden our arsenal choices became, much more significant. But that's also why you don't need to drill everything. You can look at the numbers and the cover stocks and the cores and think, all right, well, do I really need to drill this ball if I really like my gem or my attention star, or my Ion, or whatever ball you're trying to compare it to? So I look at it as a benefit, but more than 3 companies, it could probably get relatively confusing.
Mm-hmm. So, we're approaching the hour mark now, and there's 3 more questions I want to ask before we let you go, because we don't want to take up too much of your time. So I think the first would be for the people that are trying to get onto the PBA tour, or even the people who are just starting out on the PBA tour. What advice could you give them to have the best chance of success?
If I were to start over again, and I'm probably better at it now than I've ever been, is going to the gym and staying mentally sharp. Because while you're on the road and you're away from home, it's really easy to eat poorly, make bad decisions, kind of let your health go a little bit. I say first and foremost, you got to take care of yourself. The gym is a great way to release any type of tension and stress. So I think that's super important, that I would do again if I were to go chase it again. Number 2 is that you just have to compete. You have to bowl on tour. You can't give up. If I were to go back out, I would say I'd give myself 5 years and say, all right, I'm going to give myself 5 years to break through and then become, in the top 10 or in the top 5, and try to make it that way. Because some guys only pop out for a year or 2 and then they give up. You're not giving yourself enough time. There's not enough tournaments. So you have to give yourself time to learn. and then apply what you're learning in future tournaments, because the lanes on tour play nothing else like anywhere else in the world because of the rev rates and the speed and all the stuff we mentioned before. So if you're going to do it, give yourself a 5-year window. And then number 3, just be prepared to struggle. It's a steep learning curve. Some guys had a much shorter learning curve than others. Simo came out and won the Masters at like age 19. That's crazy. And he's been, he's probably one of the exceptions. Belmo, the same thing, but he's had his struggles over the years. He, for the longest time, didn't bowl great on short patterns, and now he's able to bowl good on everything. And he's won majors on just about everything. So be prepared to struggle, but that's where mentally you can, figure out how to be strong.
Mm-hmm. So I know you're not like a 19-year-old who's just breaking on at the tour, and you're a pretty established bowler, but everyone has a legacy they leave behind. And what I like to say is, there's all sorts of stuff you can get back, and you can get your money back, you can get like items back, like bowling ball, you can always get stuff back. What you can't get back is time, and sort of once you're dead, that's you done. But what always will stay behind is a legacy that you leave. And I'm just curious, what legacy do you want to leave behind once you've packed in bowling and you're living on a golf course?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I've never been asked that one before. I would say that from a legacy standpoint, I would want guys to remember you as just a guy that's tough, a guy that can bowl on all types of patterns, may not have won on everything, but a guy that can compete on several different patterns and is a hell of a spare shooter, and that when the lanes are tricky, you can find a way. When the lanes are super high scoring and the patterns are easy, I probably don't have the rev rate or the speed to be able to average 260 or 270 like some of these guys can on some of these crazy patterns. But I would just want the guys to remember me as, number one, a good dude that respects the game and that respects the competitors. But number 2, a guy that's mentally tough and that can compete on a lot of different conditions.
Mm-hmm. So, and the final question is, which we've been getting in the habit of asking, is you can nominate anybody to come on the show next. Who would you nominate to come on?
Gosh, another good question. So I guess the first part is I don't know who you guys have had on before, so I might be, repeating myself. Let me ask you this before I answer it. Are you guys targeting tour guys? Are you targeting amateurs? Who are you?
We've had a mix. We've had some amateurs from England, but we're breaking on the tour now with people like you. We've had Martin Larson on, Verity, Ryan Barnes, all sorts of people. But it really, the whole aim is to grow the sport and to grow awareness of the sport and help other bowlers. So anyone that you think could provide some knowledge, or has a story that should be told.
Yeah. Well, I've actually gotten a little bit closer with Kevin Williams. He recently moved out to our area. I think Kevin has a cool story because he's got the music scene that he pays attention to, and he's good at that. And then he's also chasing the tour, and he's on the younger side. So he might be able to give some younger guys some tips because he's been out there full time. Also a big fan of Packy. I think Packy's a great dude. Darren Tang, that's another one. Any of those guys, I think probably have the time to do it, and they'd be willing to jump on and share their insight.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we will help. That could be a possibility in the future.
Sure. Yeah, guys.
Peter, it's been great. We do appreciate you taking the time and delaying a few people getting advice about the photo 1K today. We wish you the best of luck in going forward in the PBA. We'll be certainly watching out for you. So thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on. That's the end of this episode of the SpareTime Podcast. And at the beginning, I didn't say ADR Ware, who sponsors us for this podcast, and we do appreciate what they do for us. If you like what you've seen, if you like what you watched today, subscribe, like on the channel. And we're going to be back at some point with another podcast. But for me, Nigel, and him,
Ben,
we'll see you next time. And thanks, PJ. Bye.
Thanks, guys.